My name is Stephen. I'm 67 years old, and I thought I had built a home where love and respect would always win. For years, my wife Linda and I opened our doors, believing family should help family. But when our grandson was born, joy turned to fear in a single moment. I saw my wife shoved to the ground called filthy in her own house, and my blood froze. How did it come to this? And what happened after would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, family, and betrayal. Stay with me because what I discovered will leave you stunned. I still remember the heavy air in the hospital room when Emily handed Jacob over to the nurse. My grandson was only 3 days old, his cries small but sharp, echoing in my chest like a reminder that our lives had just changed forever. Linda, my wife of 45 years, stood near the bed with her hands folded. Her face lit with the kind of joy only a grandmother can know. She had spent weeks preparing folding tiny clothes, arranging a little crib in our spare bedroom, humming lullabies when she thought no one was listening. She had been waiting for this moment her entire life. We had opened our home to Michael and Emily 8 years earlier when they got married in 2015. At the time, it felt right. Michael was just starting out in IT, Emily was working part-time. And Linda and I had more space than we needed. Family helps family, I always believed that. What was the point of building a life together if not to share it with the ones you loved most? For years I told myself we were doing the right thing. But that morning, as Jacob cried in his bassinet and Linda stepped closer with her gentle smile, everything I thought I knew about family started to crack. Emily's eyes flashed in a way I had never seen before. She moved faster than I expected, one hand tightening around the baby, while the other shoved Linda back. My wife stumbled and fell hard against the edge of the couch, her hands flailing for balance, the vase of flowers she had been carrying spilling across the floor. And then Emily's voice tore through the room, raw and sharp. "You don't touch him. You're filthy." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My blood turned cold, every muscle in my body frozen in disbelief. Linda, my Linda. The woman who raised our son with love and patience sat on the hardwood floor with shattered flowers around her and tears flooding her eyes, and she had just been called dirty in her own home. I stood rooted to the spot, the sound of Jacob's crying suddenly distant, muffled by the pounding in my ears. Emily stood above her like a queen guarding her throne. Her chin high, her grip on the baby so tight, his little face reddened. Linda's eyes searched mine, hurt and confused, as if begging me to make sense of what had just happened. My hands trembled at my sides. I forced myself to move to speak, but the words that came out were colder than I intended. "Michael?" I called, my voice rough. "Come here." He appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his shoulders slumped as if he had already been through this scene a dozen times before. He looked at his wife, then at his mother on the floor, then at me. His mouth opened, but no words came. The silence was unbearable. I stared at my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had lived under my roof all these years, and all I could think was how far we had drifted from the family I thought we were. I said 3 words, steady and deliberate words, that cut through the tension like a blade. "This stops now." Michael flinched, his eyes darting between Emily and me. Emily's lips curled into a smirk, as if daring me to do something more. Linda tried to gather the broken stems on the floor, her hands shaking her dignity, slipping through her fingers. I bent down to help her up, my hands gentle on her arms, my heart aching at the humiliation on her face. Jacob had stopped crying, his little chest rising and falling in Emily's arms. But the silence in the room was heavier than before. My wife leaned into me, her body trembling. Emily turned away, rocking the baby as if nothing had happened, her eyes fixed on the wall. Michael stood frozen. A grown man paralyzed in his own parents' living room, unwilling or unable to stand for what was right. I led Linda upstairs slowly, each step echoing with the weight of what I had just witnessed. When we reached our bedroom, she sank onto the bed, her silver hair falling forward as she buried her face in her hands. I sat beside her, my arm around her shoulders, but my mind was racing too fast to offer comfort. 8 years of sacrifice, of opening our hearts and our home, and it had come to this. Downstairs I could hear Emily humming softly, a tune that sounded almost mocking. Michael's voice was low pleading, but he wasn't pleading for us. He was pleading with her. I stared at the wall in front of me, my chest heavy with rage and sorrow. Everything had shifted in that moment. My wife had been pushed to the ground in her own home, and my son had stood silent. My grandson was 3 days old, and already he had become a weapon in a war I never thought we would fight. I didn't know what the next days would bring, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The woman downstairs was not going to destroy my family, not while I still had breath in my body. I sat there in the dim light of our bedroom, Linda's hand in mine, the echo of Emily's voice still burning in my ears, and I realized that the life we had been living was over. Something had broken, and there was no going back. The next morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Linda moved quietly in the kitchen, her steps careful, her face pale from the night before. She tried to hum the way she always did while making coffee, but the sound broke off halfway, and she poured the rest in silence. I sat at the table pretending to read the newspaper, though the words blurred on the page. Every time I looked up, I saw her hand trembling as she set down a plate or reached for a mug. Michael came downstairs late, his eyes bloodshot, his hair sticking up in odd angles. He avoided looking at either of us. He muttered something about checking on Emily and the baby, then slipped into the living room without waiting for a response. Through the thin walls, I could hear Jacob fussing and Emily's sharp voice telling Michael what to do. The sound of his "yes, honey," and "I'll handle it" hit me like little slaps. I wanted to storm in there, to drag my son back into the kitchen and demand answers, but I sat frozen, my knuckles pressed against the paper. Linda placed her hand over mine. Her voice was soft but steady. "Let it be for now, Richard." My chest burned with anger, but I nodded. As the days passed, silence became our routine. Linda walked with her shoulders rounded, as if she was trying to take up less space in her own home. She avoided the living room altogether, lingering upstairs in our bedroom or in the backyard garden. I caught her staring out the window at the rose bushes she had tended for years, her lips pressed tight, her eyes wet. She never complained, not once, but her silence screamed louder than any words could. Michael hardly spoke to me either. When he did, it was short sentences, explanations that felt rehearsed. "Emily is just tired. She is protective of the baby. You know how new mothers are." Each excuse dug a deeper hole in my gut. He was defending her, even after what I had seen with my own eyes. One afternoon, Nancy Miller, our neighbor of 30 years, waved at me from across the fence. I walked over, grateful for the distraction. She tilted her head, lowering her voice. "Richard, everything all right in there?" She said she had noticed Emily signing for packages and even for a delivery that had been meant for us. I felt a jolt like cold water down my back. I forced a smile, said something about how things were fine, then quickly excused myself. Inside, Linda looked up from the sink. What did Nancy want? I told her the truth, every word. Linda pressed a towel into her hands and leaned against the counter. "They think she's in charge," she whispered. My heart sank. That evening I tried again to reach Michael. He was rocking Jacob in the armchair, his face tired but soft as he looked down at his son. I sat across from him, searching for the right words. "Your mother deserves better than this. She deserves respect." Michael's eyes flicked up and then down again. "Emily's just stressed. The baby cries all night. She doesn't mean it." I leaned forward, my voice low. She pushed your mother to the ground. She called her filthy. Does that sound like just stress to you? He flinched, adjusting Jacob against his shoulder. Dad, please not now. The baby needs calm. I stood, fists clenching at my sides, and walked out before my anger spilled into words I couldn't take back. Upstairs, Linda sat with her Bible in her lap, though she wasn't reading. She closed it as I entered. Michael won't listen, I told her. She nodded like she had expected nothing else. Days turned into weeks, each one heavier than the last. Emily moved through the house as if she owned it, giving orders, rearranging furniture, correcting Linda at every turn. Linda stopped trying. She no longer set flowers in the living room or cooked meals the way she loved to. She simply retreated. At night, I lay awake listening to the quiet sobs Linda tried to hide in her pillow. My anger simmered until I thought it would burn through my chest. One night she whispered, "Maybe we should leave the downstairs to them. Maybe it will be easier." That broke me more than anything. This was our home, built with 40 years of work and sacrifice, and now the woman I loved was suggesting we retreat upstairs like unwanted guests. I pulled her close and promised her we would not be pushed aside forever. Still, I stayed silent longer than I should have. I watched, I listened, I collected every small sign. Emily calling herself the head of the household when speaking to the pediatric nurse. Michael bowing his head as if that were true. Packages arriving in Emily's name, neighbors nodding at her instead of us. Every night, I replayed the moment in the living room. Linda's body on the floor, Emily's voice slicing through the air. My blood had frozen that day, but something else had been awakened too. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, the right proof, the right moment to show Michael exactly what his wife was doing. Until then, I kept quiet, my silence stretched tight like a rope ready to snap. And then one morning, as I opened the mailbox, the rope began to fray. Inside the mailbox was a stack of envelopes, and right on top sat a bill from the electric company. The name printed on it made my stomach twist. Emily Hart Coleman. I held it in my hand, staring the morning sun sharp against my eyes. This house had been mine and Linda's for over 4 decades. Yet here was proof that Emily's name had somehow replaced ours. I carried the envelopes inside my hands, heavy. Linda was at the kitchen counter, buttering toast, her silver hair catching the light. She looked up and smiled faintly until she saw my face. "What is it, Richard?" She set down the knife. I slid the bill across the counter. She frowned, wiping her hands before picking it up. The color drained from her cheeks. "Why is her name on this? Richard, why does it say Emily?" She whispered, like saying the words too loud would make them more real. I shook my head, my voice tight. "I don't know yet, but I will." Before we could say more, Emily walked into the kitchen with Jacob in her arms. She looked fresh, her dark hair tied neatly back, her eyes sharp. She glanced at the paper on the counter and smiled. Not the kind of smile that warms you, but one that warns you. That bill came to me because I set it up that way. It makes things easier. Linda's lips parted, shock flashing across her face. "Emily, that's our bill. It should be in our names." Emily adjusted Jacob against her shoulder and gave a little laugh. "You two have enough to worry about." I streamlined everything. No more late payments, no confusion. It's better this way. My fists clenched under the table. Better for who I asked. Her smile faded, but only slightly. For the baby. For all of us. She turned and walked out before I could say more, leaving Linda staring at the envelope as if it were a snake on the table. That night I lay awake listening to the creaks of the old house I had worked so many years to pay for. My mind replayed her words. It's better this way. My wife slept beside me, her breathing uneven. I reached for her hand in the dark. She stirred and whispered, "I don't want to be pushed out of my own home." My chest ached, but I forced my voice steady. "We won't be." The following days grew heavier. Emily began giving instructions openly, not just suggestions. "Don't cook that. Linda, it's too greasy for the baby's air. Don't vacuum right now, Jacob needs quiet. Don't put those flowers in the living room, the pollen isn't safe." Each command was a blade. Linda's hands, once so sure in her kitchen, grew hesitant. She stopped arranging flowers, stopped singing while she worked. She lingered upstairs more and more, as if retreating from her own life. One evening, I found her sitting on the edge of our bed, holding her Bible but not reading. Her voice cracked as she said, "Richard, she doesn't even want me in the same room as the baby." I sat beside her, my arm around her shoulders, my jaw tight. She is crossing a line. The next morning, the line was crossed further. I came downstairs to find Emily rearranging the living room furniture. Michael stood by silent, watching her drag the couch away from the window. She looked at me and said calmly, "The layout needed to flow better." I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. This was Linda's favorite room, every piece chosen with care. And now it was being dismantled before our eyes. Michael avoided my gaze, his head bowed. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake sense into him. Instead, I asked quietly, "Michael, do you agree with this?" He shifted Jacob in his arms, his voice barely audible. "She just wants things to be comfortable for the baby, Dad." Linda appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She clutched the stair railing as if she needed support just to stand there. Her eyes darted to the couch, now crooked in the middle of the room. "This is my home," she whispered. Emily turned her voice sharp and cold. "No, Linda. This is our home." The words echoed through the house like a verdict. Linda swayed, her hand tightening on the railing. I stepped forward, anger surging hot in my chest. "Enough," I snapped. "This is not your house, Emily. You live here because we let you." Her smile returned thin and calculated. "Times are changing, Richard. You'll see." She turned away, humming softly to Jacob as if nothing had happened. I led Linda back upstairs, my hand firm at her back. She collapsed onto the bed, tears spilling over her cheeks. I sat beside her, my own heart pounding with rage and helplessness. Each day she stripped more of our dignity, piece by piece, and Michael stood by blind or unwilling. That night, Linda whispered that maybe she should just stay upstairs from now on, keep out of the way. The thought of her hiding in our bedroom like a stranger crushed me. I pulled her close, my voice rough. "Don't you dare give her that power." Still, I knew something had shifted. Emily wasn't just testing boundaries. She was rewriting them right under our roof. And Michael, my only son, was letting her. As I sat in the dark beside Linda, listening to the faint hum of Emily's lullaby drifting through the vents, I realized the battle for this house had already begun. A few days later, I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through the stack of mail I had pulled from the box. Among the usual grocery flyers and church bulletins was another utility bill, this time from the gas company. My heart sank when I saw the name, Emily Hart Coleman. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it across the table to Linda. She set down her teacup and picked it up with trembling hands. "Richard, what is this doing in her name?" She looked at me as if I held the answer. I shook my head. "I don't know, but it is not a mistake." That evening, I waited until the house was quiet. Emily had taken Jacob upstairs, and Michael was in the living room, scrolling on his phone. I went down to the basement, where I kept a small, fireproof box of old records. It had been months since I opened it, but I remembered every detail of what belonged inside. Mortgage statements, insurance documents, receipts from years ago. As I flipped through the folders, my chest tightened. Several recent bills were missing. When I returned upstairs, Linda was wiping the counters, her movement slow. I asked her, "When was the last time you saw an electric bill or a water bill in our names?" She frowned, thinking, "I assumed you paid them online." "Richard, it has been months." I pressed my hands against the counter, steadying myself. "No, I never changed how we pay. Something is happening here." The next morning, I caught Emily in the hallway with a thick envelope in her hand. She tucked it quickly into her bag when she saw me. I forced my voice calm. "Emily, what was that?" She smiled, her tone sweet. "Just some baby supplies I ordered. Nothing for you to worry about." Her eyes gave her away. She walked past me with a confidence that twisted my stomach. That afternoon, I made a call to the electric company. The representative confirmed the account had been transferred 6 months earlier into the name of Emily Hart Coleman. I asked how that was possible without the homeowner's consent. The woman on the line hesitated, then said all it takes is someone providing the address and claiming to be the responsible party. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, the weight of betrayal pressing hard on my chest. That night at dinner, Linda tried to bring up the subject gently with Michael. She said, "Michael, why would the bills be in Emily's name?" He barely looked up from his plate. Maybe she wanted to be sure they got paid. "Mom, she's just trying to help." Linda's voice cracked. "Help is one thing, Michael, but these are our accounts, our home." Michael's fork clattered against the plate. He rubbed his face, tired and defensive. "Look, Mom, Emily is organized. She takes care of things. Just let her." I leaned forward, my voice sharper than I intended. "She is not taking care of things. She is taking them over." Michael's jaw tightened. He stood up, muttered something about putting Jacob to bed, and left the table. The slam of the nursery door echoed down the hallway. Linda sat across from me, her hands folded tightly, tears brimming in her eyes. She whispered, "He doesn't see it, Richard. He doesn't see any of it." I reached across the table and took her hand. "He will. One way or another, he will." A few nights later, I caught Emily in the living room, rifling through a stack of papers. She looked up startled, then quickly shoved them into a folder. I asked her what she was doing. She smiled that same practiced smile. "Organizing. Someone has to." My chest burned with anger, but I said nothing. I watched her walk away, with our papers under her arm, humming softly like she owned every corner of this house. Upstairs, Linda sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumped. She whispered, "Richard, I feel like I am disappearing." I held her close, my voice steady though my heart was breaking. "You are not disappearing, not while I'm here." But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew something had to change. Emily was no longer just overstepping. She was preparing for something bigger, and I needed to find out exactly what it was. The first real crack showed one Friday afternoon when Michael came home from what he said was a job interview. He slipped off his shoes in the entryway, shoulders slumped, face flushed. I was sitting in the armchair reading, or at least pretending to, because I had been waiting to see how the interview went. "How did it go?" I asked, lowering the paper. He avoided my eyes, mumbling, "I didn't make it." Before I could say more, Emily's voice cut in from the kitchen. "He never should have gone in the first place. That job was across town, too many hours, too much stress." She came into the room, arms folded, chin raised. "He belongs here where he can help me with Jacob." Michael rubbed his forehead like a man stuck between two walls. "It wasn't like she let me go alone, Dad. She called me halfway there and told me to turn around." My chest tightened. "You turned around, Michael. That was your chance to work again." Emily's smile was thin. "Why risk leaving the baby with strangers when his father can be right here? We are fine." Linda stepped in quietly, her voice trembling. But Michael needs to work, Emily. He studied for years. He has skills. He needs his independence. Emily's face hardened. Independence doesn't pay for diapers, Linda. We need stability, not foolish risks. The words hung in the air like poison. Michael sank into the couch silent, his shoulders caving in as if the fight had already drained out of him. I watched him, my only son, shrinking inside his own skin while his wife dictated every detail of his life. That night I overheard them arguing in the nursery. Emily's voice was sharp, accusing. "You embarrassed me today. I told you not to go, and you went anyway." Michael's reply was low, broken. "I just wanted to provide." Emily snapped back. "Provide by staying home and doing what I say." I stood outside the door, my fists clenched, every instinct telling me to barge in. But I stayed still, knowing if I did, Michael would side with her, just to keep the peace. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Over the next week, Emily tightened her grip. She gave Michael lists of chores. She reminded him constantly that he had failed to secure work. She even bragged to neighbors that she was the one keeping the household afloat, though she had no job of her own. One evening, I found Michael alone in the backyard, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. I sat beside him, the air cool against our skin. "Son, this isn't you. You are letting her strip away everything you are." He lifted his head, his eyes red. "You don't understand, Dad. If I push back, she'll take Jacob and leave." My heart sank. That fear was her weapon, and she wielded it well. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "A man can lose a job and find another. But if you lose yourself, Michael, what do you have left?" He didn't answer, just stared into the dark yard. Later that week, Emily cornered Linda in the kitchen, wagging her finger at the casserole Linda had just pulled from the oven. "Too heavy, too much salt. It's not good for the baby's lungs." Linda's face crumpled. She had been cooking that recipe for 30 years, serving it at church suppers and family gatherings. To hear it dismissed like that cut deep. I walked in and placed myself between them. "That's enough, Emily. We have eaten this food our entire lives. Don't pretend you know better." She smirked, lifting Jacob higher on her hip. "If you want to live in the past, that's your choice. But I will not let this baby be poisoned by bad habits." Linda dropped the spoon into the sink, the clatter loud in the small kitchen. She whispered to me later that night, "I feel like a guest in my own home." Every word, every slight, every cut was part of a pattern. Emily was not only undermining Linda, but eroding Michael's sense of self, turning him into a shadow. The house felt heavier with each passing day. One afternoon, I walked past the den and heard Emily on the phone. Her voice was low but firm. "No, put everything under my name. I don't want any confusion." She turned quickly when she saw me, ending the call with a bright smile. "Planning Jacob's future," she said. The truth was undeniable now. She was not just controlling the present. She was preparing to control everything ahead. That night, as I sat on the edge of our bed, Linda whispered, "Richard, I don't know how much more of this we can take." I looked into her tired eyes and promised her quietly that we would not be erased, not in our own home. But even as I said it, the walls of the house seemed to lean closer, pressing in as if listening to the lies being whispered within them. Linda began spending more and more time upstairs, her Bible open on her lap, but her eyes far away. She no longer moved with the easy rhythm that had always filled our home. One Sunday morning, I found her at the closet, holding the soft blue dress she wore every week to church. She ran her hand over the fabric like it was something fragile. I asked her gently if she wanted me to drive her to the service. For a moment, her eyes lit up, but then she shook her head. "Emily doesn't like me leaving," she whispered. "She says Jacob needs me here, that church crowds carry germs." I felt my jaw tighten. Since when did Emily decide what you can or cannot do? Linda's eyes filled with tears. Since the baby was born, she said simply. That afternoon, Pastor John called to check in. His warm voice filled the kitchen, asking why he hadn't seen us lately. I handed the phone to Linda, but she shook her head and whispered, "Tell him I'm resting." I looked at her trembling hands and told the pastor she wasn't feeling well. When I hung up, Linda whispered, "I don't want him to think I don't care." Later that week, I overheard a sharp exchange in the hallway. Emily had cornered Linda by the stairs, her tone clipped. "The baby is on a schedule. We don't need you disappearing to church when we need quiet here." Linda's voice was soft but steady. "Church is not disappearing. It's where I belong." Emily scoffed, shifting Jacob on her hip. "You belong here, Linda. If you want to help, then stay in this house." I stepped into the hall, my presence startling them both. Emily's eyes narrowed, but she smiled quickly. "We were just discussing schedules," she said smoothly. I stared at her, then turned to Linda. "Go next Sunday. I'll drive you myself." Linda's eyes glistened, but she shook her head. "Not yet." Her retreat cut me deeper than Emily's cruelty. This woman who had sung in the choir for decades, who had baked pies for every church supper, who had found comfort in prayer circles and hymns, was being silenced. At night, she sat on the edge of our bed, whispering that she felt herself fading. I pulled her close, anger swelling in my chest, but all I could offer were promises. One evening, I found her humming softly to herself in the backyard, staring at the rose bushes. She whispered, "If I can't go to church, at least I can still see God out here." My throat tightened. I promised her again that she would not lose herself, but my words felt thin. The days blurred. Emily moved with unchecked authority, dictating what Linda could cook when she could rest, even how she spoke to Jacob. Michael stayed silent, too afraid to challenge his wife. The final blow came the following Sunday. Linda put on her blue dress and came downstairs, her hair brushed carefully, her Bible in her hands. For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes. Emily stood at the bottom of the stairs. "Where are you going?" she demanded. Linda's voice trembled but held firm. "To church." Emily shook her head, her smile sharp. "Not today. Jacob is fussy. We need quiet." I stepped forward, my voice hard. "She is going." Emily met my gaze defiant, but Linda hesitated. Her hand tightened on my arm. "No, Richard. Please, not today." I looked into her eyes and saw the battle inside her. She wanted to fight, but fear and exhaustion pulled her back. She turned and slowly climbed the stairs, the hem of her dress brushing against each step until she disappeared. Emily smirked and walked away, humming as if she had won some great victory. I stood frozen in the hallway, my fists clenched, my heart aching. The woman who had once filled this house with song had been silenced in her own sanctuary. And as I listened to Emily's footsteps fade, I knew the fight for our home was no longer just about bills and papers. It was about the very soul of the woman I loved. Michael had left his computer open in the den, the screen glowing faintly against the dark wood shelves. I hadn't meant to pry, but the cursor blinked on a folder labeled Home, and something in my gut told me to click. My hand trembled as I guided the mouse. Inside were files that stole the breath right out of me. Scans of documents, some I recognized, others I didn't. Utility bills with Emily's name at the top instead of mine or Linda's. A mail forwarding confirmation with our address and her signature. And then sitting there like a snake coiled and waiting a draft deed transfer with the property description of our house already filled in. I stared at the words until they blurred. My name wasn't anywhere on the form. Neither was Linda's. Instead, Emily's neat handwriting marked little notes in the margins about timelines, valuation, and county approval. My chest felt tight, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just her taking over chores or micromanaging meals. This was a plan to take everything from us. I copied every file to the small flash drive I kept on my keychain, my fingers clumsy with fear. Every creak of the house made me jump, half convinced Emily would walk in with Jacob in her arms and that condescending smile on her lips. When the files were saved, I ejected the drive and slipped it into my pocket, then sat back in the chair and wiped my face with both hands. That night, lying in bed beside Linda, I couldn't bring myself to tell her. She had already been beaten down enough by the sneers and the shoves, the insults that cut deeper than any bruise. She didn't deserve the burden of this knowledge, not yet. I stared at the ceiling, watching shadows crawl across the plaster, feeling like a stranger in my own house. The next morning, Emily was in rare form. She breezed through the kitchen like she owned the place. Jacob balanced on one hip as she gave Michael a list of errands. Her tone was clipped bossy, not the least bit softened by the baby's presence. Michael nodded quietly, his shoulders hunched like a man accustomed to orders. I kept my eyes on the newspaper, pretending to read, my heart racing with the weight of what I now knew. I drove into town under the pretense of needing books from the library. In the quiet hum of the copy room, I slid the flash drive into the public computer and printed every incriminating page. Each sheet of paper that slid from the printer felt like a confirmation of my worst fears. Deed drafts, utilities, forwarding notices. Emily had been laying claim to our home piece by piece, brick by brick, and we hadn't seen it until now. I locked the papers in a fireproof box in the basement, my hands lingering on the lid as if closing it could hold back the storm. The evidence was mine now, tangible, undeniable. I felt both empowered and terrified. That evening, Michael wandered into the kitchen after Emily had gone upstairs. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, his face pale, his voice soft. "Dad, do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's not enough?" The question nearly undid me. He sounded like a boy again, not a grown man with a child of his own. I wanted to tell him everything, shove the papers into his hands, demand he open his eyes. Instead, I studied him carefully, searching for cracks in the wall Emily had built around him. "You are enough, Michael," I said quietly. "You always were. The problem isn't you." He gave a bitter little laugh. "Emily says I need to think long term. She says we have to secure Jacob's future." My stomach nodded. What kind of future did she mean? One where my wife and I were shoved aside in our twilight years, forced out of our own house so Emily could hold the deed. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. "And what do you think, son? Do you want that future?" He didn't answer. He just stared into his glass for a long moment before setting it down and walking out. His silence echoed louder than words. That night, I finally told Linda. I couldn't keep it from her any longer. We sat on the bed, her hands folded over a towel she'd been folding, her face pale as I showed her the printed documents. She traced the lines with trembling fingers, her lips pressed together. "She wants the house," Linda whispered. I nodded. "She wants everything." Linda's shoulders slumped, her eyes brimming with tears. All these years, all the sacrifices we made, raising Michael, building this home, to be cast aside like we're nothing. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her frailty, her weariness. The fight slowly drained from her, over years of silent humiliation. "Not this time," I told her. "We won't let her win." For the next few days, I watched Emily with a sharper eye. Every smile she flashed, every casual comment she made, carried new weight. When she held Jacob, her gaze wasn't soft with motherly pride. It was possessive, triumphant. She strutted through the rooms like a queen surveying her kingdom. Michael trailed behind, quieter than ever, his eyes avoiding mine. One afternoon, I found him in what used to be my office, now swallowed up by baby gear and Emily's piles of paperwork. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his brow furrowed. "Michael," I said gently, Do you ever think about what this house means to your mother and me? He looked up startled. Of course, Dad. But things change. We're all living here now. It's not just a building, son. It's our life. It's your childhood. It's 40 years of work and love. His expression flickered, but then it hardened again, as if Emily's voice was lodged somewhere in his head. Later that night, Linda and I sat together in the dark, neither of us able to sleep. From the vents above, we heard Emily humming a lullaby to Jacob. Her voice drifted through the house, sweet and soft, but all I could hear was the threat underneath. She was nesting, securing her claim, weaving her influence into every corner of our lives. I turned to Linda, her face pale in the moonlight. We have to be careful, I whispered. She's preparing for something bigger. Linda's hand found mine, her grip surprisingly strong. Then we'll fight, she said. I squeezed her hand, staring into the dark. I knew this wasn't just a battle for property. It was for dignity, respect, and the very soul of the woman I loved. And for the first time in years, I felt something inside me harden. I was no longer just a father or a grandfather. I was a man who had been pushed too far, and I was ready to fight back. The morning air was heavy with rain when I parked outside the brick building downtown, the one with Patterson and Associates etched into the glass door. I had known Robert Patterson for years back when he helped Linda and me with our wills. He greeted me in his tidy office, his glasses perched low on his nose, and after a handshake that carried both warmth and concern, I laid the stack of papers on his desk. He flipped through them carefully, his eyes narrowing with each page. When he reached the draft deed transfer, he set it down slowly and leaned back in his chair. "Stephen," he said, "what you have here is not just sloppy paperwork or meddling. This is a calculated attempt to establish residency and possibly ownership. She's trying to create a paper trail that paints her as the primary occupant of your house." The words hit me harder than I expected, even though I already knew them to be true. "What does that mean for us?" I asked. "It means," he said, "that if you let this continue, she could claim tenant rights, or worse, attempt something like adverse possession. It wouldn't be easy for her to succeed, but the mess it creates could tie you up in court for months, even years." I rubbed my temples, the headache that had followed me for weeks pounding harder. "So what do we do?" "Document everything," he said firmly. "Keep copies of bills, mail any communication where she asserts control. Then I'll draft a formal notice requiring her to stop this immediately. If she refuses, you'll need to pursue eviction proceedings." Eviction. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. This was my son's wife, the mother of my grandson, and yet here I was, being told to treat her like an unwanted tenant. When I left Patterson's office, the rain had picked up, soaking my jacket as I walked to the truck. I sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel, feeling both relief that someone believed me and dread at the road ahead. At home, Emily was in the living room, the baby nestled in her arms, while she hummed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Michael sat nearby, looking exhausted, nodding along as she rattled off plans about sleep schedules and household routines. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, and I wondered if my son had any idea what kind of storm was building. That evening, Linda and I spread the documents across our kitchen table. Her hands shook as she read through them again, though she had already seen them. We were both quiet until she whispered, "Stephen, she's trying to erase us." "Not if I can help it," I said, sliding the deed draft back into the folder. A few days later, I overheard something that made my blood turn cold. Emily was in the backyard talking on her phone, pacing with Jacob on her hip. The kitchen window was cracked open, and her voice carried through the damp air. "Of course we're staying," she said, laughing softly. "Why would we move? We have the house. The bills are in my name, and Stephen's too soft to fight me." She paused, then added, By the time they figure it out, everything will already be set up. It'll all be ours. I gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened. Every doubt I had about overreacting vanished in that moment. She wasn't just bossy, she wasn't just protective of her child. She was plotting, and she was confident she'd win. That night I called Michael into the kitchen after Emily had gone upstairs. He came reluctantly, his face drawn and weary. "Son," I said, "do you know your wife has been putting bills in her name? Do you know she forwarded our mail?" His eyes flickered, then darted away. "She told me she was just organizing things." "Organizing, Michael. She's creating a record that makes it look like this is her house." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "Dad, you're reading too much into it. She just wants to help." "Help?" I slammed the folder down on the table. "Does this look like help to you?" He glanced at the papers, then shook his head like a man trying to block out a truth he couldn't face. "I don't want to fight," he muttered. "We just need peace for Jacob." "Peace," I repeated bitterly. "At what cost? Your mother's dignity, our home." He didn't answer. He just walked away, his shoulders hunched, leaving me standing there with my rage echoing in the silence. Linda came to my side, resting her hand on mine. "He's afraid," she said softly. "She has him wrapped around her finger." "I know," I whispered. "But fear doesn't excuse blindness." The next morning, Emily cornered me in the hallway. She was holding Jacob, her voice sweet, but edged with steel. "Stephen, I've been thinking, maybe it would be better if Linda stayed upstairs more often, for hygiene. Babies are so sensitive." I stared at her, fighting the urge to let my anger spill. "This is Linda's house," I said evenly. "She belongs wherever she wants to be." Emily's smile tightened, her eyes flashing. "I'm just saying it's for the baby's health. Surely you want what's best for him." Before I could answer, Linda appeared at the end of the hall, her face pale but her eyes sharp. "I think I can decide for myself where I belong," she said quietly. Emily's jaw clenched, but she said nothing more. She turned and walked away, her footsteps sharp against the wood floor. That night, as Linda and I sat together, in the dim light of our bedroom, she took my hand. "She won't stop, Stephen. Not until she has everything." "I know," I said. "That's why we have to be ready." The sound of Jacob crying drifted down the hallway, followed by Emily's sharp voice. The house felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were closing in. I realized then that Patterson was right. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a war, and if we didn't fight smart, we could lose everything. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the creaks of the house and the storm outside. For 40 years, this home had been our sanctuary, the place we built with sweat and love. Now it felt like enemy territory. As the first light broke through the curtains, I whispered to myself, "No more waiting. It's time to fight back." I drove into town before anyone in the house stirred the roads, still wet from the night's rain. The sun was barely above the horizon when I pulled into Patterson and Associates again, the folder of documents heavy on the passenger seat. Robert looked surprised to see me so early. But when I spread the new evidence across his desk, his expression hardened. "She's escalating," I said, my voice low. "She's telling people we won't stop her. She's acting like it's already hers." Robert read in silence, then tapped the stack of bills and the mail forwarding order. "Stephen, this isn't just arrogance, it's strategy. She's trying to create the optics of ownership. You need to make a move now." "What kind of move?" "A formal cease and desist." He set his pen, already scratching notes. "We'll serve her notice demanding she transfer utilities back to your name, cancel the mail forwarding, and stop any action suggesting residency rights. If she refuses, you'll be in a stronger position for eviction and fraud charges." The words weighed on me like bricks, but I nodded. Do it. When I got home, Emily was already in the kitchen, chirping to Jacob as she spooned oatmeal into her own bowl. She looked up, her smile tight. Early morning, Stephen. I set my keys on the counter, meeting her gaze. Just taking care of business. Her eyes lingered on me a second too long, like she was searching for a crack. Then she turned back to the baby, with a laugh that felt rehearsed. Later that day, Linda and I sat together in the den, going over Robert's plan. Linda's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale. Stephen, what if Michael sides with her when this happens? I swallowed hard. Then he'll see what she really is. We can't keep protecting him from the truth. That evening, the phone rang. It was Michael calling from work. His voice was strained, nervous. Dad, Emily says you've been snooping around her papers. She says you're trying to make her look bad. I gripped the receiver until my hand hurt. Michael, your wife is putting our bills in her name, forwarding our mail drafting deeds for our house. That's not me making her look bad. That's her doing it herself. There was a long silence. Then he sighed. I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe your eyes, son, I said, my throat tight. Come home and look at the papers yourself. When he came by that night, I laid the folder on the table. He flipped through page after page, his face growing paler. She told me it was just convenience, he whispered. She told me she was helping. Helping doesn't mean erasing us, I said firmly. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Dad, if you go through with this, if you push her, she might... He trailed off, but I could hear the fear in his voice. She might what? I pressed. He looked away. She said she'd leave with Jacob. She said you'd never see him again. Linda gasped softly beside me. My heart clenched, but I forced my voice steady. That's blackmail, son. That's not love. Michael didn't answer. He just stood, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked out into the night. The next morning, Robert called. The notice was ready. I drove back into town, signed the paperwork, and arranged for the process server to deliver it. My stomach churned the whole drive home. When the knock came at our front door, I stood in the hallway, listening. Emily answered with Jacob on her hip. The moment the man handed her the envelope, her voice shifted from confusion to fury. She slammed the door so hard Jacob started crying. Minutes later, she stormed into the living room, waving the papers. What is this? She demanded. I kept my voice calm. It's notice that this is our home, that you will stop trying to make it yours. Her face twisted red with rage. You're destroying this family, Stephen. All I've done is keep this house running. You've done it by stealing control, I said. That ends now. Michael appeared in the doorway, his eyes darting between us. Emily shoved the papers at him. Tell him, Michael. Tell him he can't do this to us. Michael looked down at the documents, his jaw tight. His silence stretched so long it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. Finally, he muttered, I need time to think. Emily's head whipped toward him, her voice sharp. Time to think? You should be standing with me. But he didn't meet her eyes. He just turned and walked back out the door. Emily rounded on me, her voice low and venomous. You don't know who you're messing with. I stared right back at her. No, Emily, you don't know who you're messing with. That night, the house was silent, except for Jacob's soft cries upstairs. Linda and I sat at the kitchen table, the served notice between us. The battle lines were drawn. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. Emily's footsteps echoed sharp against the hardwood as she stormed through the house that evening, her anger like a storm, barely contained. I sat in my chair in the den pretending to read. but my eyes never moved across the page. Every slam of a cupboard, every clipped word to Michael, was a reminder that she had been cornered and was lashing out. Michael came to me later, his face pale, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Dad, she's furious. She says you're humiliating her. She says you're trying to ruin our family." I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Michael, I didn't humiliate her. She did that herself when she tried to take what wasn't hers." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's saying if this keeps up, she'll take Jacob and leave." The words cut deep, but I kept my tone steady. "And if she does, she'll have to answer to the courts, not just to us." Michael flinched like I had struck him, but he didn't argue. He just muttered something about going upstairs and trudged away. That night, Linda and I lay in bed listening to the baby fuss and Emily's sharp voice carrying through the vents. Linda turned to me, her voice trembling. "Stephen, what if she really takes him?" I pulled her close. "Then Michael will finally see her for what she is." The next few days passed with a strange tension. Emily was quieter, almost sweet in her tone, but the sweetness felt like poison. She cleaned obsessively, rearranged the pantry, even cooked dinner one night. But underneath it all, there was calculation. She was regrouping. One afternoon, I went to fetch the mail and found a thick envelope addressed to Emily. It bore the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize. My stomach clenched as I carried it inside. Emily snatched it from my hand before I could say a word, her eyes flashing. "Personal," she snapped and walked upstairs. That night, I called Robert. I told him what I'd seen, and his voice was grim. "Stephen, if she's already consulting attorneys, she's not backing down. She may try to countersue, claim tenant rights, or worse." The thought of my own daughter-in-law trying to use the law against us made me sick. Still, Robert was calm. "Let her try. You have the evidence. You'll win." But winning in court meant months, maybe years of turmoil. And in that time, Jacob would grow up in the middle of chaos. 2 nights later, the real blow came. Michael sat across from us at the kitchen table, his face drawn, his eyes rimmed red. "Emily says if you don't drop this, she'll file for separation," he whispered. "She'll take Jacob with her." Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I stared at my son, anger and sorrow warring inside me. "Michael, do you realize what she's doing? She's using your child as a weapon." He lowered his head. "I know." "Then stop letting her." His silence was answer enough. Emily came downstairs not long after carrying Jacob in her arms. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you think you can win this, you're wrong. I'll take him, and you'll never see him again." I rose slowly from my chair, my heart pounding, but my voice was steady. "Emily, that's not your decision to make alone." Her smile was cold. "Watch me." The days that followed blurred together, but the tension only grew. Linda avoided the living room altogether, choosing to spend her hours in the garden or upstairs in our room. I caught her crying quietly. More than once, the weight of years of kindness twisted into humiliation, pressing down on her. I knew I had to act before Emily pushed further. One evening, after she'd gone out for groceries, I pulled Michael aside. "Son, look at me," I said. "Do you honestly think this is about Jacob's future? Or is it about Emily's control?" He opened his mouth, closed it again, and finally whispered, "I don't know anymore." "You do know," I pressed. "You've just been afraid to admit it." Michael looked away, his voice breaking. "If she leaves, I lose my son. And if you stay blind, you'll lose more than that. You'll lose your family." Before he could answer, Emily walked in, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of us. "What are you two whispering about?" she asked sharply. "Nothing," Michael muttered, retreating upstairs. Her gaze lingered on me. "I don't like secrets in my house." Our house, I corrected firmly. Her smile was thin. For now. That night, as Linda and I sat together in the quiet, I realized this fight wasn't just about property anymore. It was about truth. It was about showing my son the reality he refused to see and protecting the dignity of the woman who had given me her life. The storm had broken, and there was no turning back. Michael showed up at my door the next morning, his eyes bloodshot. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world sat on them. He didn't knock, just walked in like he had when he was a boy, though now the house felt heavy with secrets between us. He sat down at the kitchen table, rubbed his hands together, and whispered, "Dad," she admitted it. I froze the coffee pot still in my hand. Admitted what? Everything. The bills, the mail even, that she'd been looking into transferring the deed. He stared down at the wood grain of the table. She says it's not stealing. She says she's protecting Jacob's future. I set the pot down and joined him, my chest tight. Son, that's not protection. That's fraud. His voice cracked. She said if I don't back her up, she'll take Jacob and disappear. Linda, who had been standing quietly near the sink, let out a sharp breath. You can't let her do that, Michael. He looked at her like a little boy again, ashamed, desperate. What am I supposed to do, Mom? If she goes, I lose my son. You'll lose him either way, I said, my voice firm. One way you lose him to her, lies. The other way you fight for him, and he grows up knowing the truth. Michael buried his face in his hands. I don't know if I'm strong enough. I reached across the table and gripped his wrist. Then you borrow our strength until you find your own. That night, Emily confronted us. She marched into the den holding Jacob on her hip. Her hair pulled tight, her face cold. Her voice was sharp, cutting the air. I know what you're planning. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone even. We're planning to protect what's ours. She laughed a sound without joy. This house is already mine, Stephen. You just don't see it yet. Linda stood, her voice shaking, but steady. No, Emily. This house is ours, built with 40 years of work and love. You've been nothing but a guest. Emily's smile faltered for the first time, and I caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. She shifted Jacob against her shoulder, kissed his head, and whispered loud enough for us to hear. Don't worry, baby. Mommy will keep you safe from them. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. The sight of her using that child like a shield lit a fire in me that words couldn't contain. The next morning, I met Robert again. He reviewed the documents, shook his head, and said quietly, Stephen, it's time to involve the courts. We'll file for eviction and fraud. And if your son is ready, we'll help him file for custody. The word custody hung in the air. I drove home in silence, the trees along the road, nothing but blurs of green. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Linda in the garden, bent over her roses, her hands moving gently despite everything. I stood there for a long moment watching her, realizing that everything Emily threatened was really about this woman's dignity, about protecting her from one more wound. That evening, Michael came downstairs after Emily had gone to bed. He sat across from me again, his face pale but resolute. Dad, I've made up my mind. I want custody. I want Jacob to grow up in a house where people love him, not where he's a bargaining chip. I nodded, pride and sorrow swelling inside me. Then we'll fight together. The next days were a blur of preparation. Meetings with Robert gathering more documents, Linda quietly organizing old receipts and photos that proved our decades in the house. Every page we collected was another brick in the wall we were building to stand against Emily. Then came the night of the explosion. Emily found the notice for court dates on the counter where Michael had left it. Her scream rattled the walls. She stormed into the living room, waving the papers. Divorce custody, you traitor. Michael stood firm, his voice low but unwavering. "It's over, Emily." She lunged toward him, her eyes blazing, but he stepped back, holding out a hand. "You're not taking my son from me. Not like this." Her face twisted and she spat words meant to cut. "You're weak. You're nothing without me," maybe Michael said softly. "But at least I'm not a thief." She froze, her mouth opening, then closing. And for the first time since she entered our lives, she had no words. She grabbed Jacob tighter and stormed upstairs, the sound of her footsteps like hammer blows. That night, the house was thick with silence, the kind that sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Linda and I lay awake listening to the creaks of the floor above us, wondering what Emily would do next. When dawn finally broke, Michael came into our room. His face was drawn, but his eyes carried a new strength. "She says she's leaving," he whispered. "She says she'll take Jacob and you'll never see him again." Linda clutched my hand. I rose slowly, every muscle tight. "Then she's given us no choice," I said. "It's time to let the courts decide." Michael nodded, his jaw set. "I'll stand with you." The three of us stood together in the early light, the house quiet around us, knowing the final battle was no longer a possibility, but a certainty. The courthouse in Cedar Grove was smaller than I remembered, its limestone walls weathered by years of storms and sunshine. Walking through the doors that morning with Linda on one side and Michael on the other, I felt the weight of every step. This wasn't just paperwork or hearings. It was the moment we fought for our home, our dignity, and for the truth to be recognized. Emily arrived with her lawyer, her hair pulled into a severe bun. Jacob balanced on her hip. She didn't look at me or Linda. Her eyes stayed locked on Michael, a cold challenge in them, as if daring him to waver. But my son didn't flinch. He walked straight to the clerk, signed where he needed to, and sat down with us. The hearing was tense. Emily's lawyer painted her as a devoted mother who had taken on responsibilities because her aging in-laws were overwhelmed. He spoke of her organizing bills, handling household duties, protecting her child from germs. He even suggested that Linda and I had become incapable of managing the property. Linda sat with her back straight, her chin high, her eyes glistening, but fierce. When it was our turn, Robert laid out the documents. Utility transfers without consent, mail forwarding orders, notes on a deed transfer, even the phone records showing calls to real estate offices. The judge's expression grew sharper with every page. Then Michael spoke. His voice shook at first, but it grew stronger as he went on. He told the court how Emily had manipulated him, how she had used their child as leverage, how she had systematically undermined his parents in their own home. By the end, there was no mistaking his resolve. Emily's face hardened, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. But the damage was done. When the judge finally ruled, the words felt like air after weeks underwater. The utilities were to be returned to our names immediately. The mail forwarding was to be canceled. Emily was to vacate our home within 30 days. And custody of Jacob was awarded to Michael, with Emily granted supervised visitation. Linda's hand gripped mine so tightly I could feel the blood leave my fingers. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they weren't of defeat. They were of release. Emily stood, her face white with fury, and hissed at Michael that he would regret this. But he didn't back down. He simply held Jacob close and turned his back to her for the first time. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Emily moved into a small apartment across town, bitter and silent. She returned for visits with Jacob, but the supervision order meant she couldn't twist him into her weapon anymore. Michael started helping with bills, paying rent, doing chores he had ignored for years. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect, and he was finally giving it. One evening, months later, I sat on the porch with Linda, the summer air warm and heavy with the smell of roses from her garden. Michael was pushing Jacob on the swing set, his laughter ringing through the yard. For the first time in years, our home felt like ours again. Linda leaned against me, her voice soft. "Do you think she'll ever change?" I shook my head slowly. "People like Emily don't change, but she can't hurt us anymore." Michael walked over, then his son clinging to his shoulders, his face tired but lighter than I had ever seen it. "Dad, Mom, I just want to say thank you. For fighting when I couldn't. For protecting me when I didn't deserve it." Linda reached out and touched his cheek, her eyes full of forgiveness. "Families make mistakes, Michael. What matters is we find our way back." I watched the two of them, my wife and my son, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The scars were still there, but so was the strength. We had fought back. We had won. Life didn't go back to what it had been. It couldn't. But it moved forward in a way that mattered. Our grandson grew up knowing love, without manipulation, kindness, without conditions. And our home, the one nearly stolen, stood as a reminder that sometimes you have to fight hardest for the things that seem most fragile. Looking back now, I realize the 3 words I spoke that night in the kitchen were more powerful than I understood. This stops now. It wasn't just about Emily. It was about reclaiming our lives, our respect, and the bond that held us together. And to those of you listening, I'll say this. Never underestimate the strength that comes when you fight for your family, even when the odds feel impossible. If you've ever faced betrayal in your own home or been pushed aside in the place you built with love, know this. You are stronger than you think, and sometimes the hardest battles bring the clearest victories. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Tell me where you're listening from, and let me know if you've ever had to fight for what mattered most. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, make sure you stay with us. There are always more battles, more lessons, and more victories to uncover.